Welcome everybody to the Partos Innovation Festival. For those who just entered, we are super happy to have you all here in the room and also online. And we are looking forward to your participation. So please use the chat. Diva is here to...
I'm here with the iPad, so if you have any questions for the speakers, let us know in the chat and I will direct them to our lovely speakers.
Fantastic. And the theme of today is navigating and shaping the future. And in order to do that, obviously, you need fresh perspectives. So this session will be all about fresh and diverse perspectives. So we have 5 short speakers who will share their perspective, their angle, let's say. So there's people who work on data and digital, feminist and queer, community-led and inclusive financing, and feminist leadership. And after they gave their first brief talk, they will also be matched in a bit a random way. We have a spinning wheel for that. So they don't know yet with whom they will enter the dialogue. But they're going to have the dialogue together, and then we're going to look at the commonalities, because obviously, if you want to change or shape the future, you can't do it by yourself. So we're going to look for the commonalities and see how we can mix and merge and bond and bridge those perspectives. So maybe... So as I said, we use the chat, so there will also be lots of opportunities for you to use the ask questions. But we're going to first start with the spinning wheel, and the spinning wheel will help us decide who's going to go first. So maybe you can show the spinning wheel. There you go. Super exciting. Who's going to talk to whom?
Miss the sound effect.
Oh yeah, the sound. Yeah, Patrick Meyer. Yes, yeah. So we're going to start with Patrick Meyer, and he will be talking to whom? Can we see that on the spinning wheel as well? No. Yeah. I see it spinning, but I see myself. Yes. So we don't know yet either. There we go. Oh, not with Patrick Meyer himself. So Pascal Grotenhuis. Now, there you go. So maybe I can start with Patrick Meyer. I'm actually quite a fan already for over 10 years. I followed his blog, iRevolution. So Patrick, he's also the executive director of We Robotics. At iRevolution indeed, the blog. So Patrick, maybe can you share your perspective?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for having all of us. It's great to connect with all of you. So I'm going to get started because I understand I have just 3 minutes. But thanks again for your very kind words. So we're going to move to the next slide, please. So Western-based international organizations tend to hold a vast amount of power. And this is due to a number of systemic factors, including colonialism and racism, for example. And these systemic factors enable international organizations to maintain a monopoly on global development. Next slide, please. Now, this monopoly, this vast amount of power or market share, gives Western-based INGOs a large power footprint. And by power here, I mean power as in authority, control, and influence. Now, power in itself is, of course, not inherently bad. Power is essential. Organizations need power to drive change. But the power that tends to drive Western INGOs is largely centralized and is rooted in a Western-centric system and a singular view of the world. And so this power is then used by INGOs to drive change that is global, but very much top-down and technocentric as well. Next slide, please. Now, in contrast, the power footprint of local organizations is much smaller and far more diverse. And their power tends to be more firmly rooted in local expertise and lived experience, local leadership and local ownership. And this explains why the power of local tends to favor social solutions over hyper-technical solutions. Next slide, please. Now, what happens to the power footprint of an international nonprofit organization when they implement a development project, for example? Well, one consequence or negative externality of this engagement is the growth of their power footprints. It takes power to make power. And in other words, the more international organizations implement development projects in a kind of typical foreign-led, top-down, and technocentric manner, the more they tend to consolidate their authority, control, and influence. It's like a byproduct, regardless of whether their projects are successful or not. Next slide, please. Now, we know that power tends to corrupt, and that absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. You asked for fresh perspectives, so I'm going to be extra provocative. But the fact is, we can't change what we can't measure. So my question to all of us in development organizations, whether that's Western or international or local, is how do we measure the power footprints of international organizations to create more visibility and transparency? How do we reduce the power footprints of our organizations and make these organizational footprints less permanent? How do we make them less harmful? Next slide, please. Can we gain inspiration from other fields? Analogies can be very powerful. For example, how is the carbon footprint measured? We know that carbon footprint calculators exist. There are methods and data sources. So can we come together, international and local organizations, to co-create a power footprint calculator? Can we make our power footprints visible? Can we make the consequences and the byproducts, the negative externalities of our engagement in global development more visible? And last slide, please. So then can we ask the following question? Can we take the power pledge? Meaning, can we pledge to actively measure and reduce the power footprint of the international organizations that we work with? So here's my last ask. If any of this is of interest to you, and if you want to be engaged in co-creating practical ways to get at this measurement of power footprints, then please get in touch. We don't have expertise in power. I know it's an area of study with deep knowledge and lots of learnings, and we would love to learn from others in the process. So thank you very much.
Fantastic, well done. And in time, I'm really pleased with that. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Pascale Grotenhuis. She is the Director for Social Development and the Ambassador for Women's Rights and Gender Equality. And she has over 17 years of experience in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Pascale, can I also ask you to share your fresh perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me. And thanks, Patrick, for the great start. It's always difficult to come second, but it's also about power, a different kind of power. So thank you very much. And I would love to reflect upon feminist leadership to strengthen inclusive development. It probably isn't a surprise as an ambassador for women's rights and gender equality, but I feel that governments and organizations should gear towards feminist leadership. And then the first question is, of course, what is feminist leadership? Well, there's no one-size-fits-all definition, and all kind of countries in our neighborhood, like France and Spain, adopted feminist diplomacy or a feminist foreign policy, and they all do it their own way. But feminist leadership is developed by women's movements in the Global South as an alternative to traditional and hierarchical leadership. It's about making undemocratic and untransparent and asymmetrical power relations and dynamics visible, and then trying to transform them. This means taking a clear-eye look at the economic, social, and political systems that are producing and reproducing the inequalities. And what you see in COVID times is that the already existing inequalities have increased and become even more visible, or have become even more invisible, but that have definitely increased. Why should we go for feminist leadership? For me, it's to reach gender and social justice, inclusion and equality. To me, feminist leadership is the only way to reach better and a more sustainable future. Research and best practices provide ample, convincing evidence for this. The last 1.5 years, as I just said, we have seen several publications on COVID-19 demonstrating women's leadership as being the most effective response to building back better, amongst others from UN Women and UNDP, but also from governments like New Zealand. Across the globe, women are at the helm of institutions carrying out effective and inclusive COVID responses. Women leadership has proven to be very effective. Through a feminist leadership, it goes beyond woman leadership. It deals with addressing the systems of power that have both led to the increased inequalities and increased it, and rebuild these systems to become more equal and therefore more just. I think it's an inspiring concept. If we want to work towards fairer systems, applying feminist leadership will further strengthen our efforts, amongst others, in working on the SDGs. It addresses systems of patriarchy, marginalization, exclusion. With feminist leadership, we build systems based on equity, legitimacy, and social justice. Feminist leadership inspires me in my daily work. It also frightens quite some colleagues in my daily work who work on other fields. But for me, it really inspires me by looking into the advantages of developing a feminist foreign policy like Canada, Sweden, France, and Mexico. It also inspires me in the context of the Netherlands. We are very involved in the Generation Equality Forum and in the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements. And it also inspires me and most of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a strategic partner in new programming under strengthening civil society policy framework in which we focus on transformative processes, amongst others in the area of enhancing gender equality. Feminist leadership does not have to be fixed in a step-by-step guide. It's an ongoing process of learning and reflection. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. How can we bring feminist leadership forward? Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot. Well done. And now the difficult task for the both of you to discover or explore how would you merge your perspectives, or maybe not merge, but where do you see the commonalities? Do you have, I mean, who would like to start there? Where do you see you could potentially collaborate? Haha.
That's a small question on a Friday afternoon.
There you go. Yes.
We'll get back to you after the weekend.
Now, Patrick, do you want to go first?
I don't think I have anything particularly intelligent to add. So over to you. Thank you.
I don't think that's true. No, but I think both of our pitches are about changing or transforming power relationships. And we finance, as the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, quite a few of the civil organizations who are actually all present, I think, at the Innovation Festival today. I was wondering, many of those NGOs have a watchdog function, and how can you use the watchdog role of civil society towards the use of data and technology by the private sector and governments? I was wondering how you see that, and is there something we can learn from that?
Well, that's very well put, and also a fascinating question. Obviously, there's an incredibly vital role for civil society to play in that kind of watchdog kind of capacity, right? And you know, what I would love to do, thanks to the great presentation you gave as well, is for us at We Robotics to become more conversant and fluent in what is entailed by feminist leadership, and see how we might be able to apply that, if that's the correct way to think about it, to this idea of power footprints, and whether that could actually help make that particular initiative actually more effective as a result. Because I think what comes to mind is this the concept of intersectionality, right? Is bringing all these identities together rather than collapsing it into one identity and then you have a label that sticks. Is what would it mean? I'm literally making it up as I go along here, but what would it mean to look at like the power footprint through the lens of intersectionality, which is not the question I would have asked before actually hearing your presentation on feminist leadership. So thank you for that. I don't have any answers though.
That's, quite a brilliant answer already. Would you like to add something maybe, Pascal, from your perspective? Now,
I think actually that would be great if we can, because for me, a feminist foreign policy would be, or feminist leadership would be, about inequalities. And I would love actually to see if we can work together on the footprint. And intersectionality is part and parcel of our work as well, because everything is linked, and the people who are already vulnerable will, because of COVID or all the other crises, become even more vulnerable. So yes, if we could maybe see if we can, it's very pragmatic. I would love that.
Me too.
There we are. Deals are being made. Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I'm just saying thank you very much for everyone for making this happen.
No, and I was actually, Patrick, maybe if I can, we have the SDG 3 fund, which is the biggest fund for feminist movements or feminist activists in the South. And I think we're, as the Dutch government, are really proud of that. But it would, maybe we can see if we can measure the impact that they have more along your lines.
Very interesting.
Because it's a huge amount of money. It's $500 million actually. It's a huge fund.
Wow.
But we of course measure the impact. But I would love to see if we maybe can see if we can use your tech and your approach to see if we can make it even better and clearer.
That sounds amazing. And just to thank you. And by the way, this is an initial idea, and what we're looking for is partners to help bring in their expertise to co-create strong practical metrics that can then be practically applied. So we're really at the beginning of this journey, and we're looking for fellow journeyers to figure out where this goes. So we'd love the opportunity to co-create and then apply and learn together.
Yeah, me too. That would be really interesting.
Fantastic, I'm really pleased. So I can ask all kinds of questions, but I think this is a beautiful end of your merge. I mean, I see things happening, concrete, very practical, down to earth, from different perspectives. So thanks a lot for that. So maybe I would like to now introduce the other three, because of the spinning wheel, it's not that exciting anymore. Who's going to talk with who? But I would briefly like to introduce to you Rosabella Nyumba, Dumiso Gacha, and Ishita Dutta. And I'm very sorry if I don't pronounce your names fully correct. So, but please know that I do admire you. So maybe we can start. Sorry, I have an issue with my cards. That's what you sometimes have. So terrible this. I'm sorry. Yeah, there you go. I'm back again. So maybe we can start with Dumi. You are a non-binary queer feminist and founder of Success Capital organization. Could you maybe start sharing your perspective? And the others, listen carefully, because I'm going to ask you the question as well. Where do you see the commonalities?
Thank you so much. And so it's anchored on three main elements. First is in decolonizing storytelling, recognizing that language matters, and then relieving oneself of the responsibility of equity in saviorism. And so with the first, it's recognizing that storytelling had always been an integral aspect in terms of intergenerational legacies, and knowing full well that the African history was often passed down orally through different generations. And I think it's critical in recognizing the truth and in instilling lessons learned, because we can draw from previous activists who have had successes in different struggles. The second element is really about recognizing and moving away from the normative development context of storytelling that incites a culture of performative or having to perform poverty. And I think, within the development narrative, it's recognizing that it often comes with an institutionally white gaze. And so I think in instilling dignity and ensuring that community narratives cannot just be curated by the community, owned by the community, and driven by the community, it's critical to recognize the contextual issues and emerging lived experiences in lieu of expertise, in lieu of statistical or averages that tend to, if not correlate or establish causation within the context of knowledge production, and ultimately dictate knowledge-based decision-making. And so I think it's very critical to recognize that element. The second is in recognizing that language matters. So linguistic colonial borders currently dictate programming and resourcing, ultimately determining the context and politics and pop culture that narrates, lived experiences of those who are marginalized, excluded, or erased, noting some of the elements that exist within the context of religious right and conservatism or nationalism. And I think it's really important because language essentially allows us in terms of recognizing how we frame issues, whether we speak of survivors or victims. It ultimately speaks about how an individual can participate within the context of a public forum, whether religiously or socially. And I think, it's really quite reflective because we're talking about media representation, we're talking about consumerism, and we're talking about, narratives, particularly within a queer existence, that are often either erased, not necessarily considered African, and many other elements of morality or taboo. And I think, it ultimately determines one's citizenship. It determines how one can actually be considered palatable, whether you're looking at it in the context of professionalism or you're looking at it in the context of standards and how normative standards are established through language. And so if we're not acknowledging and recognizing linguistic privilege, not just in development, but in the very fabric of society, then we'll be missing the point of ensuring that we are truly achieving the outcomes in the decade of action. Lastly, relieving oneself of the responsibility of equity in saviorism and really speaking to accountability within the context of colonialism. I mean, I'm speaking to you today 4 days before, a milestone high court case that decriminalized same-sex relations in Botswana is being challenged by the government, literally 4 days, in 4 days. And I think it's very critical for us to recognize it within the context of, a day before International Day of the Girl Child and 4 days before International Lesbian Visibility Week. And so I think it's very critical in recognizing that, accountability looks very different. It doesn't mean that you either exercise a form of saviorism within the context of development, going to African country and feeling like there's a possibility to save as a result of people not being able to exercise agency that they already possess. But it really speaks to drawing down what counts as equity. Is that an endowment? Is that repatriating illicit financial flows? I'm not sure. But I know it certainly means redressing a skewed, racist, and imperialist system that negates and absolves accountability from those who have power, those who have benefited from patriarchal systems, and those who continue to benefit in terms of privilege. And so I think when we speak about restorative justice, when we speak about repatriating equity, it's talking about restoring the means of production, the assets that were exploited and extracted from Black labor, land, and legacies. And so I think these are the three underpinning narratives that need to dominate not just perspectives or co-development processes or designing of programming, but essentially equitable resourcing as well. And so that's decolonizing storytelling, ensuring that language matters, and relieving oneself of the responsibility of saviorism, i.e. supremacy, and ensuring accountability in colonial legacies. Thank you.
Ooh, well spoken. Thanks a lot. So, Ishita, I already hear people doing this, so fantastic. So, Ishita Dutta, she is a feminist activist and a human rights practitioner from India and also a manager from Voice. So, can I also ask you to share your fresh perspective on, share your fresh perspective with all of us?
Thank you. And I hate to follow that up because Dumi, that was so powerful and it blew me away. But here I am representing Voice. So I hope I can build on what you said, but certainly not do justice to everything that you said. So as I was introduced, I have recently joined the team at Voice, an innovative grant-making facility that promotes diversity and inclusion by resourcing organizations and groups led by rights holders facing discrimination and marginalization. In April this year, Voice turned 5. In this time, it has provided almost 500 grants, most of them to local groups in 10 countries in East Africa, West Africa, and Southeast Asia. Voice's fresh perspective comes from its ongoing learning journey to becoming an accessible grant-making facility that attempts to live the value, nothing about us without us. This principle informs not only how we select the organizations and groups that we can support, but also who makes up voice and how it takes up space in the sector. Discussions on localization, decentralization, and decolonization are taking place all around us in the context of what Winnie Byanyima has wittily called the pandemic of inequality. It is important to recognize the interconnectedness of these systemic issues. Vaccine inequality is another symptom of the same development challenge that we seek to address when we try to decolonize aid. While we continue to engage in these necessary conversations about shifting power systemically, we must continue to take practical steps to make sure that rights holders at the margins who are fighting daily to improve their lived realities are adequately resourced now. And this is exactly what Voice does. To give a concrete example of how we resource inclusion, and here I use the word resource intentionally instead of finance, because our strategies on linking and learning are an integral part of our grant-making model. I want to talk to you about the Nothing About Us Without Us Awards, or the Now Us Awards. These awards celebrate innovation in inclusion and were jointly launched by Voice and Partos at the 2018 Innovation Festival. The winner of the 2018 awards, Handspeak Vietnam, used the empowerment grant they received to set up the first organization for and by deaf people in Vietnam. Seeing the rights holder-led innovation in action on a global stage catalyzed the idea within Voice of scaling up the awards nationally in each of the Voice-focused countries. In 2019, we piloted the Now Us Awards in Tanzania, where Hapo Zamani Zakale won an award to integrate traditional storytelling with multimedia to create children's storybooks and improve literacy. This year, social innovators in 7 voice-focused countries are pitching their ideas at National Now Us Awards. We started earlier this month in Cambodia, where Nearing, an emerging group of young women, will use online platforms to combat negative gender stereotypes in society. And through this, our learning question as a grant maker remains. What happens when you recognize and respect that rights holders know best how to push the boundaries for enhancing inclusion? I think we begin to live localization and make social change happen. Thank you.
Ah, wonderful. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Are there any clarifying questions in the meantime? No, I don't think so, right? No. Okay, fantastic. So then we can move to Rosabella Nyumba. She is the researcher. She's a researcher at the Center for Frugal Innovation from the Kenya Hub. Rosabella, are you also willing to share your fresh perspective with us, your ideas?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Rosabella Nyumba from the Center for Frugal Innovation Africa, and I'll be discussing frugal models of development cooperation. Next slide, please. The Center for Frugal Innovation Africa is a research center which was formulated as a result of an alliance between 3 universities, that is Leiden University, Erasmus University Rotterdam, and Delft University of Technology. The Center for Frugal Innovation engages in research, in frugal innovation research, in order to get the social, economic, and environmental impact. Next slide, please. The frugal models of development cooperation I'm going to be speaking on are the build and transfer model and the self-organized aid for development model. These are models we have interacted with here in our work here at the Kenya Hub. Next slide. For the build and transfer model, resource mobilization is done by external development agencies. Management depends on the project phase. It is more formal, and ownership is by the, it is more formal, and then the community is engaged in all phases of the implementation. Next slide. For the self-organized aid for development model, the resources are mobilized by the community. It is managed by the community. It is owned by the community. It is less formal, and communities are also engaged in all stages of development. Next slide. What are the lessons learned? From this, we learned that self-organized aid for development model requires strong relationships of trust with the local implementing partner. 2, timelines may change based on established mechanisms of community, organization, and decision-making structures. 3, proper accountability structures need to be put in place for the build and transfer model to work. And 3, time is very critical. All the good networks are built over time, not in a day. Next slide, please. Why frugal models? Frugal models allow for resource sensitivity. Frugal models allow for knowledge exchange. Frugal models allow for localization and contextualization. With this, we mean that they can be adapted in any environment. And also frugal models allow for flexibility, allowing actors to connect easily. And lastly, frugal models allow actors to plug into local development actions, not reinventing the wheel. Next slide. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot. A lot of applause up here as well. The difficult question, I already prepared you. Where do you see commonalities? I see already many, but maybe I'm also curious where you see the commonalities and where you see opportunities to potentially collaborate between the different perspectives. Who could I give the floor of you? Who would like to go first? I'm looking at Dumi, Ishita, or Rosabella.
I think I can go first.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. I think, there are two main points, and it makes sense, the reason why language matters. And I think, being on the advisory board of Voice Global clearly is quite something. And that, sort of commitment in making sure that, rights holders are part of that strategic, framework and existence of Voice Global. And so I think it's really fantastic when you speak about decolonizing, and it's fantastic when we speak about inclusion, because when I spoke about language mattering, it's about access, it's about inclusion, ensuring that, rights holders are really at the forefront and the heart of the work. And so I think that's the one element, is that, there are different ways in which one can contribute and collaborate, whether strategically, practically, or within the context of broader solidarity and international movements. And maybe, the second aspect, Success Capital was really underpinned or driven by the very essence of participatory research. And so it's easy to relate. But I will say one thing, particularly around the element of frugal, because frugal recognizes and acknowledges capitalism for what it is, in that, artificially manufactured aspects of inequality, whether it's meritocracy or scarcity. And so I think it's really important, especially when they were speaking about partnerships, in that we can have all these different perspectives to engage and gorge. Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And, historically, when just looking at how, for instance, Mariam Makeba once spoke in Sweden and said, it seemed like Black people or Africans only existed when the colonizer arrived. So it's only in instances where Van Riebeck or his colleagues arrived and they were like, boof, now all of a sudden they're Black people. And so I think it's important for us to sort of recognize within the context of knowledge production that the Global South still tends to dictate, what narratives are prevalent, what narratives dictate the actual needs and the experiences of society. And I think it's really quite telling in that, in the spirit of partnership, in the spirit of resource sensitivities, is that there's so many elements that all of us can contribute within the context of broader knowledge production. And I think it's critical, just last thing, is to echo the same words of Audre Lorde, to say, what does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? And then she responded to say that it means that only the most narrow parameters of change are possible and allowable. So neoliberal, imperialist development frameworks that are still quite narrow within the context of whether theory of change or M&E tools and limited to project resources. So I think it's critical for us to continuously critique and push and obviously have conversations like these to consistently question and try and figure out what does it mean to truly leave no one behind, whether it's within the context of knowledge production or ensuring resources to rights holders. Thank you.
There you go. Very clear, loud and clear. So maybe can I invite Ishita, where do you see some of the commonalities between your perspectives? Are there elements that stand out for you specifically?
Sure. No, I was hoping to use the same entry point as Dumi did, which is to say that we are really privileged and grateful to have Dumi on the voice board, and hope that these really sharp insights and will continue to inform the work that we do. But I just wanted to echo because what you said about storytelling and the power of language. And I was reading earlier this week an article by an Indian graphic storyteller and artist called Vidushi Yadav. And she wrote about, she said this quote about, our images need to talk about solidarity, not charity, power, not helplessness. And this is come building off of our experience of working closely with feminist organizations in the Global South and doing illustrative work for them, and how the gaze shifts when, depending on who's looking. And so not adding to anything you said, but just saying that it will be an ongoing endeavor to see how we can be reflexive and accountable in our own practices as an intermediary grant-making organization to some of the very, very real issues that you raised. And yeah, I'll just stop there.
Thanks a lot. And Rosabella, what do you recognize of being maybe a commonality, or where you feel, hey, maybe we can tap into that?
The aspect of social inclusion. Mm-hmm. That is what I found common in what we are doing. The other thing is the aspect of resource inclusion, and also the very aspect that context matters. Because I was speaking from a frugal perspective, and it is very important to note that resources are scarce. So what do we do now? Because marginalization comes in when those who do not have resources maybe may feel marginalized because they do not have the resources. Now, how do we solve this? It does not mean that they cannot innovate because they do not have as much resources as maybe the developed countries or those or other countries. So what they can do is use whatever they have, which means innovate frugally in order to steer up development. So yeah, that's what I found. I found as a common factor. Another thing was that the issue of accountability. I think we are all accountable. So and accountability can only come in when there is the issue of trust. So first we go with trust, and then after that, accountability comes in. Thank you.
So the trust and accountability and the context. And maybe another question for you, Rosabella. I mean, you work in this Frugal Innovation Center. So do you experience any tension between locally led innovations and scaling them up? How does it work for you? Because you said it's context specific. We have to be aware. That's also a commonality. Do you see any challenges in that field for your work specifically?
I think the first thing when we are looking at scaling up, we have to first find out is the community willing to scale up? Because what we do is that first we find out whether they are willing to scale up. Then secondly, after that, if the scaling, what are the ramifications of this scaling up? Is it beneficial to them? Because scaling up is not the way scaling up in this project works will not be the same in scaling up another project. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So yes, scaling up is possible, but it also depends on the context. And for scaling up, we can use capacitated local actors can steer the wheel, can be engaged in that, can do the scaling up, and even people at the grassroots themselves. Because one of the projects I was presenting on, the people at a slum in Kibra, what happened is that they were helped to establish the first biocenter, after which they have been in charge of building the other biocenters themselves. So yeah, even community can participate in scaling up.
Thank you.
Yeah, on a whole different topic, but we have a question in the chat for the whole panel. Sarah is curious to know what the panel finds a good substitute for the term Global South.
Good one.
Want to use all the different perspectives here? Or if you feel like it's a fine term?
I like majority world. I've always been a fan of majority world.
Majority
A majority vote, but then what
World,
do you think?
World. Yeah.
Majority world.
Oh, majority
Instead
world.
of global.
The
sorry.
world, the globe, the majority world.
That's quite
Yeah.
another aspect. Yeah, majority world. Nice one. Anybody else? All thinking loud.
Yeah, just workshopping on the top of your head.
No, I was thinking that I find it a good shorthand, let's say, to describe things, because but that's what happens when you try to label things. Nuance is lost. And in my organizing work in my past life with sex work communities, for example, they told me that, you know, when we talk about global South and global North, in a very binary sense, then we don't recognize marginalizations that occur in the global North, and we don't have space to recognize the ways in which quote unquote global South actors might be complicit in in abuse of power. And so as a feminist, I think it's always interesting to complicate things and not stick to absolute labels. So I think, Sarah, until we find a better substitute, we can keep using this nuanced understanding of the terms global South and global North.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.